Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Ins and Outs of Work. And this one is on a very topical topic. It's the Great Resignation.
It is, yes. And for those of you who've been following our Season 2 mini-series over the summer, this episode will be in the same format as the episodes of Season 2, meaning we'll have a definition, a did you know, we will have our infamous outsider outpouring again.
Wow. And then we're gonna go into some insider actions from Neely and a story to wrap it all up. That segment approach that I know you've all been loving so much. It's going to be fantastic. So why don't we just get straight into it, Neely?
Please.
Amazing. Okay, so let's get started with the definition. Okay, so the Great Resignation is this name. It's a bit of a dramatic name, Neely.
Yeah.
Given to this recent trend that shows that up to 40% of the global workforce, mainly millennials, are seriously considering leaving their employer this year. And that's coming from a bunch of different sources. There's a Microsoft study that was talking about that. You know of another source as well, right?
Yes, in the US, I believe there was the Labor Department come out that had some figures on this, Joe. So there's various sources indeed. Now, where is this big wave of resignations coming from? There are several reasons for this. They vary from pandemic burnout, a collective reassessment about priorities and what matters most. We see that there's a shift in people's mindsets from live to work to work to live. Yes. And we also see a certain resistance from people towards giving up the flexibility that they gained over the past 15, 16 months in the face of their companies calling people back into the office.
Yes.
So there's a whole range of reasons why people are seriously considering to quit their employer this year.
Yeah, many different drivers there, but just pause for a second and imagine the implications of that. 40% of the global workforce thinking about leaving their current jobs. This is huge. Yeah. Massive. Being millennials ourselves, though, Neely, we thought for you, the listener, today, that we would do a short, snappy, how to retain your millennials episode amidst this big move of the Great Resignation, with a healthy dose of humor thrown in, of course. We'll try our best to be funny.
Yeah. We'll try. Okay, on to our Did You Know part. So in this part, we share some interesting stats about the topic that we are talking about today. And so here are some stats. Let's start right away, Joe. Did you know that by 2025, millennials will make up 75% of the workforce?
Wow. So they're a good chunk of the workforce.
Yeah.
Okay, did you know, Neely, that experts have very opposing views on whether there are actually differences between generations at work? So we've talked about, how this could be more of a millennial trend, the Great Resignation, but actually, when we talk about generations at work, are there actually differences? So according to a recent study by the IBM Institute for Business Value, the differences among millennial, Gen X, and baby boomer employees have been grossly exaggerated.
Yes, Joe. As it turns out, the findings show that the three generations have very similar career aspirations, needs, and attitudes. What's more, the attitudes and characteristics of millennials in the workplace are often mischaracterized, and we will come back to that in our myths part.
We will. And it's often, it's easy sometimes to say, because you're this age, you have this outlook on life and these drivers. But in reality, more and more experts are actually coming back to say, it's not like that. What is interesting, though, if we really focus back on the Great Resignation, this fact that 40% of the global workforce is thinking about leaving, and a lot of them are millennials, the responses to these surveys that are bringing those stats to light are at least showing that there's a difference between the generation's outlook on their futures. So, there might not be difference in the drivers, but what we're really sensing is that the actions that each generation is prepared to take might look a little different. So maybe more millennials are actually prepared to leave their job in the wake of the things they've experienced in the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, totally. And then there's a last did you know that we have, Joe. And also this is not surprising, but also it's not something that's just regarding millennials, but there's 55% of millennials who are not engaged in their job. But as I said, we know that engagement amongst employees is generally quite low. So maybe it's a bit higher amongst millennials, but again, that probably is then linked to where they are in life and the fact that they still have quite a while to go before they can retire.
Right, that's the thing. So maybe the difference here, and we're going to come back to this throughout this episode, is that millennials just have that much longer left of their career that they're actually thinking, is this worth it, sticking it out for that much longer?
Yeah, exactly. All right, it's time for my favorite part, Joe. It is time for the outsider outpouring.
Yes, fantastic, Neely. Thank you for... It's really your favorite part? That's so kind. It's also my favorite part. I enjoy it too. Basically, this is the part of the episode where I, as your HR outsider, resident HR outsider, get to just have a rant for 30 seconds. So what we're going to do is start the clock in just a moment, and I'm going to have a rant about this topic, the Great Resignation. So here we go. Start the clock. So I really do feel like millennials do get a bad rap. You know, people call us lazy, entitled, out of touch with reality, dreamers. You can go on. But not every person, as we've said, embodies all those characteristics just because they were born within this date range. What I have seen a lot in my age group, though, having said that, is that purpose and meaning really counts for something. And I don't know if that's a millennial thing. Maybe it's just a human thing. But my sense is that when we're talking about the Great Resignation, it's coming back to a sense that people have gone through a tough time. They're realizing more and more that a nice paycheck is not enough. You need to have meaning at work. And that is my outside outpouring for today.
Thank you so much, Joe. It made me all nostalgic about season 2, this.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to our myths, stereotypes, and debunking.
Yes, so this is the section where we name a few myths. We've got 3 today. 3 myths about this topic. We're focusing in on millennials, obviously, within the Great Resignation. 3 myths, and then we're going to debunk them. So first one for you, Neely.
Thanks, Joe. So, first myth here. Millennials are different from their parents and grandparents. This is not the case. Fact is, millennials are similar to their parents and grandparents when they were the same age. But, crucially, under new circumstances. That recent IBM survey we mentioned earlier, echoed by an article in The Economist, noted that millennials want roughly the same things, regardless of when they were born. They want to be given interesting work to do, be rewarded on the basis of their contributions, and to be given the chance to work hard and get ahead.
Yes, they're not so different after all. And if you did want to read up on any of those, they're in the show notes. Have a read. Second myth, okay, myth number 2 is this: millennials lack loyalty to their employer. And specifically around the Great Resignation, that could be something that comes up, is that, oh, they're just leaving, they lack loyalty. So contrary to popular perceptions, millennials actually stay with their employers longer than Gen X workers did at the same ages. This reflects the fact that millennials face a labour market characterised by longer job tenure, fewer employer switches and other types of career transitions, and lower level fluidity in the labour market. So millennials, for example, are less likely to have been with their employer for less than a year than Gen X workers at the same age, and they're actually more likely to have been with their employer for a fairly long period, like between 3 and 6 years. So the data is showing that millennials, compared to Gen X at their age, are staying longer.
Thanks, Joe. The next myth, number 3, is that millennials want constant acclaim and think everyone on the team should get a trophy. Now, this one makes me smile a bit, but so this is not the case either. When asked what makes a perfect boss, so to speak, millennials said they want a manager who is ethical and fair and also values transparency and dependability. Lower on the list of importance is a boss who recognizes their accomplishments and asks for their input. Well, I think there's nothing wrong with wanting recognition for a job well done, right?
There isn't, but millennials definitely do have that stereotype of thinking, you've done a good job, give me a trophy or a medal.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily true. Although it's nice.
It is.
Okay, and a final one nearly is all millennials eat avocado toast and do yoga.
Do you eat avocado toast, Joe?
I do eat avocado toast nearly, but I don't do yoga.
So there we have it.
Debunked. I've tried to do yoga before, but it's really painful. It hurts. I'm not flexible.
Okay. Let's get to some insider actions.
Yeah. Okay, it's time. Yes, it's that time of the episode nearly where actually we get more concrete, more practical, and Nearly, who's our HR insider, our HR expert, is going to talk us through a step-by-step, some practical tips, right, Nearly, to getting this right, to retaining employees?
Absolutely, Joe. So I think we've been talking for a really long time about the war for talent, and this has been top of mind for many organizations for quite a while now. However, I do think also in light of the Great Resignation that we will see a really, really big focus now on how can we retain our people. So we've been thinking about that, and also based on what we've heard from people that were guests on the show, the ins and outs of work, we've come up with a few things that are good to keep in mind and to really focus on going forward.
Great.
Yes. So first of all, there is unsurprisingly flexibility and autonomy.
Yes.
We mentioned this as well already as one of the reasons why so many people are considering leaving their company is that they are now used to a certain level of flexibility and autonomy because they were working remotely, at least for a lot of knowledge workers that was the case. Let's be clear about the distinction here. But so they are now used to that. They have found a different type of work-life balance, and they do not want to be pushed back to pre-COVID situations. They do not want to find themselves again commuting for 2 or 3 hours a day. They just don't want to do it, Joe. Yes. So this is a very important one. Think about this, flexibility and autonomy. And obviously that will go hand in hand with coming up with a new hybrid or even full remote way of working.
Yes, it's so true. The sense that I think this is all hitting at the moment where companies are like, okay, come back to the office now. And it's like you said, no, we've sort of experienced a different way of working, a different work-life balance. And we don't just want to go back to the past.
No. Exactly. Now, another one, and this is something that's definitely been emphasized by the pandemic, is an increased focus on people's health, and that includes mental health.
Yeah.
So we do see that companies are paying a lot more attention to that because the fact that so many of us are not seeing our colleagues as often as we used to means that, some of us really struggle with that. So there is definitely an increased focus on mental and health. And I think that's something that we'll continue to see.
Yes.
And then something that is very much linked to what we just said is strong social bonds at work. These remain super important, maybe even more important than before. Again, because we will find ourselves in a more virtual environment. So the social connections, they are super important.
Yes. So thinking about as an organization, how do you maybe double down on creating an environment and a culture where social connections and social bonds are strengthened?
Yes, and I mean, Joe, I think let's be honest here, this is not something that's easy, right? So we just this morning, we had the pleasure of doing an interview here in person with someone, and the energy when you meet people in person is just different. And it's an extra challenge if you have to try and recreate that same kind of connection and energy with people online.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's going to go a long way to actually retaining your people, especially millennials who are really hungry for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and then another one is growth and purpose. I'll talk about them at the same time. So you mentioned it already, Joe. So purpose is very important. Again, coming back to this remote setup and a lot of us being just by ourselves in front of a screen or several screens, the purpose then becomes so much more important because you do not have your colleagues side by side there with you.
Yes.
And it's not like, okay, so I'm not maybe that interested in my job, but my colleagues are fantastic because you don't see them as much. Yeah. So that means that it becomes much more important to actually enjoy what you're doing and to find a certain purpose in that.
For sure. So good, Nearly. If I just summarize these 4 big points that we've hit and the kinds of things that organizations need to be thinking about to retain their talent, millennial talent. Flexibility and autonomy is number one. Secondly, mental health practices and policies. Thirdly, strong social bonds at work. And finally, growth and purpose. Really working on each of those. Thanks, Neely.
You're welcome.
Brilliant. Okay, our final section for today is our story example. So this is the section where we're going to talk through a bit of a story from a company doing this in a really innovative way that's put together policies or actions that are actually working towards this goal or solving this in a really great way. So that company that we're going to talk about today is Drift, Neely.
Yes.
And it's a brilliant company that we love. We got to interview Dina Upton in season 1 of the podcast. She's Chief People Officer at Drift. And I think the story at Drift, especially their experience of going through the pandemic, is such a great example for this, right?
Yeah.
So what did they do? First of all, if we talk about that flexibility and autonomy piece, they really doubled down on that. Dina Upton talked to us in that episode that we did with her around their policy of hiring adults. So it sounds super simple, but it's like they work on hiring people and then growing people and having the kind of people that are adults and that own their own growth and own their future.
Yes, exactly. And since they hire adults, that kind of goes together with everyone who works at Drift having a really big amount of flexibility and autonomy.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool to see that. And something else, Joe, I think what was really cool. So Drift is a remote first company. So they used to be in office, but then they made the decision to go full remote. And so now they are fully distributed.
Yes.
However, what was really interesting is that Dina was telling us how they will still have offices, but the offices have gotten a completely different goal. So whenever people go to the office at Drift, then it really needs to be, for instance, to have a conversation with other people or to collaborate or to maybe brainstorm. The idea is not for people to go into the office, go into a space that's close with a door and work them there by themselves. That's not the idea.
Exactly. And I'm pretty sure they were calling those conversation spaces. So they renamed their offices conversation spaces, and they made a very deliberate approach to not even go for the hybrid model, but to go fully digital first, as they call it, so that everyone's on an even playing field. And when they do come into the office, all these conversational spaces, it's for a specific reason of being together.
Yes, exactly. And I think this is very nicely a link with what we just mentioned about the importance of strong social bonds. The way they use the offices at Drift is definitely beneficial for these social bonds.
Totally. And just the final area that we wanted to mention around the Drift example is the way they do onboarding. So onboarding, obviously new hires, but I think it can also really relate to retention and engagement, because the onboarding function within Drift actually doesn't sit in the HR team, it sits in the marketing team. And that was really interesting hearing about the why behind that from Dina. Really the why is that it really embeds the vision and the mission and the purpose of the company into new hires and into the culture as a whole. So, you know, the marketing team is obviously the ones responsible for selling the vision and painting that clearly to the market. And that's what they actually use that team to kind of embed that into their culture and into their people. And so you just think about how that must help with engagement and then retention over time. We talked about how purpose and meaning and growth is so important for millennials especially. That's just a really cool example from Drift.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. And I think that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. So this was our episode on The Great Resignation, a very topical topic that we hope you've enjoyed listening to.
And as always, if you haven't done so yet, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, share it with a friend, leave us a review if you like, and then we will see you again for next episode.
Yes, see you again soon.
Bye.